Good morning and welcome back to the Keep the Conversations Going Festival. We have an exciting lineup today and we're going to kick off our day with a talk from Maria Tivnan about performance and activism, a snapshot of Gaza, Mexico and Ireland. Remember that you can pledge your support for TheatreMaker on our website at TheatreMaker.ie/donate. We'll hand it over to Maria.
Hello, how are you? Good morning, everyone. Really nervous and happy to be here on this nice day. So, my name is Maria Tivnan. I'm a PhD student in NUI Galway, and I'm looking at how theatre artists create the meanings of home in Galway, Gaza, and Mexico. And today I'm just going to be talking a little bit about performance and activism. And I've got a PowerPoint, but it's because I really need images because they're much more powerful in lots of ways than me and my voice. So I'll start off with them. Okay, so welcome. This presentation is, as the title says, a snapshot of performance and cultural practices in 3 different cultural sites: Gaza, Mexico City, and Ireland. And I live in Galway in Ireland, and that's where I'm coming from in my home. So that's, I guess, the underlying kind of foundation of the presentation. While each of these 3 places, Galway, Gaza and Mexico City, maintain significantly complex and distinct histories and demographics, they each speak to histories of colonialism, migration and ideas of national and or collective memory within their own contexts. Now, I'm aware of my own positionality as an Irish female artist scholar conducting this research, and also that a presentation can only scratch the surface of what are huge and complex themes and issues. However, I'll do my best to communicate my learning and the words and work of other artists through this digital medium. So, as I said, just my practice-based research looks at how theatre artists in each of these sites may create or challenge meanings of home, and that encompasses topics such as space and place, the body, memory and belonging. And the themes of resistance, reassurance and resilience continue to emerge through my research as highly significant to home and homemaking. And I believe that these themes, resistance, reassurance and resilience, may be considered central to performance as activism, or performance and activism. So as you can see from the examples on this slide, performance and activism is as huge and varied an area as the meanings and connotations the word performance itself carries. Okay, so just bear with me now. Yeah, be on the next slide. Will I press it again? Okay, hold on. No. Yeah, no problem. I just need, I could say next if we need to move to the next slide, it might be easier. I definitely don't want to keep clicking buttons. Just the images on that slide there while I'm just waiting to move on, just so I can to tell you. Oh, there we go. No.
Good morning again from the TheatreMaker studio. Apologies for the delay here. We just encountered some technical gremlins. We would like to welcome back again for your pleasure Maria Tivnan, who's going to speak to us about performance and her project with Gaza, Mexico and Ireland. Thank you very much for coming back with us, Maria.
Sorry, I seem to have this effect on technology. Sorry. So, yeah, my name is Maria and I'm a PhD student at NUIG, and I'm also a theatre practitioner. And my research is just on how theatre artists create meanings of home in Galway, Gaza and Mexico City. So I'm just going to go straight into the presentation, if that's okay. There are PowerPoint slides with this, but that's because a lot of the work is very visual, and I think it's good to see as well as see me. Great. Okay. So this presentation is, as the title says, a snapshot of performance and cultural practices in 3 different cultural sites: Gaza, Mexico City and Ireland, my home, where I live in Galway, and that's the foundation or the base of this, I suppose. So while each of the 3 places, Galway, Gaza and Mexico City, maintain significant complex and distinct histories and demographics, they each speak to histories of colonialism, migration and ideas of national and or collective memory within their own contexts. Now, I'm aware of my own positionality as an Irish female artist scholar conducting this research, and also that a presentation can only scratch the surface of what are huge and complex themes and issues. But I'll do my best to communicate my learning and the work and words of other artists through this digital medium. So, as I said before, my practice-based research looks at how theatre artists in each of these sites may create or challenge meanings of home, which encompasses themes and topics such as space and place, the body, memory and belonging. And the themes of resistance, resilience and reassurance continue to emerge through my research as highly significant to home and homemaking practices. And I believe that these themes, resistance, resilience, and reassurance, may be considered central to performance as activism or performance and activism. As we can see from some of the images and examples on this opening slide, performance and activism is as huge and varied an area as the meanings and connotations of the word performance itself carries. So just go to the next slide, please. Great. So the image on top you see there, the yellow one, is by the performance activist group, the Guerrilla Girls. And the image below is from Good Chance Theatre, which was started by 2 British men, Joe Murphy and Joe Robertson, who on their way to Germany passed through Calais in France in 2015 and saw the makeshift refugee camp that had formed there. So they decided that they wanted to provide the people in Calais with a platform to share their stories. And so they constructed a theatre in the shape of a dome, as you see here, which has since become the Good Chance Theatre's signature pop-up venue. Now, they spent 7 months there in total, and that dome has been described, or was described at the time, as a place where everything could be spoken, a place of peace, a nerve centre where you can share stories or throw a party, not just a theatre. And this then grew into the international hit, The Jungle, commissioned by the Vic in London. Now, the reason I'm showing you these 2 images, I'm not going to focus on these, is because I think both of these examples demonstrate agency, which is really important, I feel, to performance and activism in different ways. So the Guerrilla Girls piece there, it invites the audience or passers-by to directly partake in the performance. You can pick up the piece of chalk and you can write something on the wall. Whereas the Jungle facilitates the stories to be heard that may otherwise not be heard. Now, both examples may or may not bring about actual change, but change is an elusive concept that can be very hard to measure. And just in terms of that, when we think of theatre and activism, people often think of protest theatre, of political theatre, Brechtian theatre. I'm not so sure how helpful this classification is. A lot of political theatre, if you like, takes places in conventional spaces, in theatre spaces, whereas according to Lynn Gardner, as you see there, research, activist theatre tends to take place on the street, in local communities. It's at grassroots level, and there are many artists now currently working as activists, and they would work in long-term local grassroots projects where the emphasis is really on co-creation. So I suppose it's just to give a picture of that before we go on. I'm not sure if the classification is helpful, but just to think outside the theatre and outside, sometimes that work can be a bit limited. So I'm trying to open up that a little bit. Next slide, please. Okay, so just going to focus on Gaza for the moment. So this section of the presentation looks at a number of cultural and performance practices during the period of the 11-day war in Gaza this May. And that's to explore the use of digital mediums and spaces that may be used to circulate stories, information, and seek action or intervention in times of urgency, which is that's important, the urgency of this. When your home is crumbling all around you, you can occupy virtual and digital space. But what does this mean in terms of survival, community, trans-global connection, and potential for change? So just for a few moments, I'm going to focus on a selection of photographs and videos circulated on social media on the Sand Girl, an artist in Gaza, and on visual art and protests in Ireland during this time. So I'm going to use Marcela Fuentes' concept of performance constellations as a frame for analysis throughout. Okay, so just to go back to the context of this, for 11 days this May, in a war raged between the Israeli Defense Forces and Hamas, the Palestinian militant group who governs the Gaza Strip. As you see there, according to the UN, 12 people were killed in Israel and over 200 people, including 63 children, were killed in Gaza at this time. Over 10,000 people were displaced and more than 450 buildings were destroyed or damaged, including 6 hospitals, healthcare centres, a water treatment plant and a media tower. Next slide, please. So on the morning of May 12th, I received through Facebook Messenger a 26-second video filmed on a phone from my friend in Gaza. The shaky frame depicted dark grey smoke behind buildings and the sound of planes can be heard. The skyline then appears to burst with fire and black smoke and the force of explosions is heard, followed by off-screen cries of distress. That's a still from the video that you see there. The video was taken at 7 a.m. that morning in Tal Al, Gaza. And my friend asked me to share the video so that these violations can reach the entire world. Now, I did as I was asked, and I shared it on social media pages and to WhatsApp groups that I'm part of. And there were many messages in response, mostly expressing disbelief at what was happening, some expressing lack of knowledge about Gaza, and others expressing how it seemed different when the video was sent from someone you know, that it was more real somehow. 145 people viewed the video on my Instagram page, 33 people reacted to on Facebook, and 28 shares. There were 28 shares on Facebook. So I'm not basing this presentation on a small sample of social media interaction. That's not so unusual in this era of hypermediality, where social media dissemination is an integral aspect of encounter with live or ongoing events and happenings. I'm using this as a starting point to demonstrate how social media posts, including photos and videos, do not just document or chronicle events as they happen or are almost in sync with happening, but they play a generative role, an active role in impacting the experience and reception of what is being recorded. So the example of fans at a gig posting pictures and videos as the gig is happening is one way to understand this. But here I'm looking at war. I'm looking at life and death, at catastrophe, loss and grief. And I argue that the immediacy at which images and videos of this war circulated through social and digital media enabled a global dialogue, that stimulated collective action in Gaza and internationally. The next slide, please. So all of these ideas speak to Marcela Fuentes' work. She describes performance as performance constellations. So in terms of off and online systems of communication in connective dramaturgies that propel, shape and sustain collective action across spatial and temporal gaps, and thus bring together fragmented, dispersed modes of participation through effective circulation. So she uses performance constellations as a way of describing assemblages between physical and digital sites. So if you take the example of the image there, the viral rapper from Gaza, 12-year-old Abdulrahman Al-Shanti, or his MCA rap, He is involved in a mentorship program based in Cork, and it's through this that he was supported to produce this rap in English during the war in Gaza. Next slide, please. So Abdul has 354,000 followers on Instagram. It's managed by his father. And this video has 2.7 million views on YouTube. So the lyrics here that you see in yellow are from the rap, and he chooses English because he wants the whole world to understand me, and expresses his belief that music can take you anywhere in the world, which indicates ideas around mobility, the mobility of language, of digital videos, of performance, which is particularly pertinent when you're living in Gaza, when your physical mobility is completely restricted. Next slide. So the female artist known in Gaza as the Sand Girl has been making sculptures from sand at the back of her house in Gaza for several years. So she posts pictures of her work online over Facebook and Instagram, where she has over 3,000 followers, and also on a YouTube channel with over 500 followers. So here you can see details from 2 of her sculptures. I've been in online contact with this artist for over a year, and have exchanged views in writing formally and informally on the role of artists in relation to home, on the use of digital media and activism. And these conversations have been mediated through Google Translate, as I cannot speak Arabic, but she can speak some English. Next, please. So when she was asked about sharing her art digitally, she said, "Sharing my artwork via the internet is the only window in the besieged Gaza, that we are calling for help from inside a prison called Gaza, which besieges all our Palestinian people. There is no freedom. We do not have the slightest human rights. We cannot travel. There is no work or a job. We cannot live in safety." So this statement indicates the vitality of having a space for expression within a physically restricted space. However, she does also point out that the digital space can also be restricted, as when she posted images of the war in Gaza in May, her Instagram account was suspended for 30 days. Next, please. When I asked her how making the artwork feels, she said, "I feel happy and proud of myself, that I emptied my sadness or joy and made beautiful statues. Yes, I feel very tired, and at the same time proud that I have a talent through which I can talk to the human world." Next, please. I'm really interested in this idea of making art from what's available in your immediate environment, and how this environment can be transformed by art. As we see here in this image of the Gaza artist Bilal Khalad, who is painting calligraphy on a rocket shell in Gaza during the war this May. And you can see the press also present in the image. So this image indicates the potential of the performativity of artistic practice in transformation, resilience, and resistance, and in provoking a reaction in the audience. The image currently has over 20,000 likes on Instagram. Next, please. So I'm going to go back to Ireland for a moment to demonstrate the potential of the digital in creating these fuentes, constellations or assemblages of ideas, actions, art and people. So throughout Ireland, many protests and demonstrations occurred in support of the people in Gaza and Palestine during this war, in opposition to the air raids and also in opposition to the occupation of Palestine by Israel. So Facebook pages and groups were used as a means to communicate the time and location of these events and to gather people. These social media pages were also used as a space to display images of these events and further promote future events and action and political agendas beyond the event itself. So I took these images here at a vigil I participated in Salt Hill, Galway. You can see that the red material of the costume billowed in the sea wind, and this was very useful in attracting attention of passers-by and also for providing photographic opportunities to share across digital platforms. Next, please. So on June the 1st, a group of artists from Clare projected what is prescribed as a visual message of care onto the cliffs of Moher. Caoimhe Butterly, one of the organisers who spent time in Gaza herself as a volunteer with healthcare services, writes in an article for Hot Press that the group called themselves From Ireland with Love, because what we wanted to convey through our visual message more than anything was love. tenuous hope, and a seeing of the grief. The image is dedicated to children in Gaza who both lost their lives or lost families during the war, especially to survivors 6-year-old Susie Ishkantana, 5-month-old Omar Haladidi, 10-year-old Aziz Al-Khalak, and to the deceased Rala, Hala and Yara Al-Khalak. Media coverage of this event framed it as artivism through its use of the symbolic, of visual interruption, in this case the beautiful surroundings of the cliffs of Moher, as a means of expressing dissent and solidarity beyond borders. The location is highly significant here. As Butterly explains, we hoped to make the seas between us a place of connection, from one coastline to another, from one people to another. And this image was shared across multiple digital media platforms and raised over €3,000 for the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. Next, please. Just take a little breath here. So we're going to go to Mexico. So I'll now turn to Mexico. And I just want to say that my personal response to a place in space where I have never physically been, I have never been to Gaza either, unfortunately. So to Mexico, it's constantly changing as I navigate through the ideas and worlds of Mexico presented online through the eyes and ears of traveller blogs, historians, journalists, novelists, theatre companies, charities, grassroots organisations, Instagram pages and academia. Most recently, this exploration feels a little more concrete as I've worked with 2 Mexican artists to co-create a digital project. I'll refer to that later. However, I can still feel overwhelmed by words and languages in which I have no real fluency, by images of vivid colour, artistic expression and ingenuity, and by data, which demonstrates the inadequacy of human rights that I cannot accept, yet I can often feel helpless towards. So Mexico is the 5th most densely populated city in the world. It has a population of over 21 million people. And if you can see just there on the top left, I don't know if it's my left here, at the top corner anyway, the blue and white diagram, that is, so Mexico was built on the remains of Tenochtitlan, which was the capital of the Aztec Empire. And Tenochtitlan roughly translates as next to the nopal cactus fruit of the rock. So you can see on this glyph the eagle clutching a serpent on the cactus. And that's the frontispiece of the 16th century manuscript, the Codex Mendoza. And that image is on Mexico's national flag. Now, I've placed this on purpose beside various images and icons of Mexico, such as Frida Kahlo, the Palacio de Bellas Arts, the Cultural Center in Mexico City, mariachi players, an altar to the Virgin Guadalupe, and a protester who's protesting against the high rates of violence towards women and femicide. Now, these, again, they're just snapshots of a vast place in space, but they're important to bear in mind as we look at the work of some Mexican performance artists. Next, please. I just want to draw attention while just to femicide in Mexico. So according to the 2019 data, 10 women a day are killed in Mexico. 10 women a day. So let's just try to take that in, or, you know, let it sink in and wonder how the hell is that happening. There is a plethora of reasons. I'm not qualified to go through all of them, but they go back. It goes back to cultural norms and attitudes established by machoism, colonialism, and a long history of corruption at governmental level. That just to name a few, and it's propagated by a lack of interest, follow through, and possibly resources by the police force. The top image that you can see here depicts a mural dedicated to Diana Velázquez, who was murdered in July 2017. And her mother, Lydia, wrote a letter about the aftermath of this murder, and we read this out as part of with her permission, as part of our digital performance, Mi Cuerpo, Mi Casa. So below you can see an image of the feminist group Ni Una Menos Mena, which is Not One More, who occupied the Human Rights Commission building of Mexico City in September 2020 to protest against the government, federal and local authorities in the face of inefficiency in the procurement, administration and execution of justice for relatives of victims of disappearances and femicides in Mexico. As far as I know, they're still occupying this building. Next slide, please. So just going to look at the work of Astrid Haddad now. So Astrid Haddad is a Mexican cabaretta, a vocal and performance artist. And I collaborated with Astrid, one of the artists I collaborated with, to make Mi Cuerpo, Mi Casa. And initially, I was hugely drawn to her work because of its immense visual impact and also her ability to turn inside out and upside down many of the notions of Mexican national identity, which have been detrimental for many sectors of the population, particularly women. So here you can see Astrid in one of her signature shows, Heavy Nopal. She wears a skirt based on the Mexican folkloric China Poblana that has its origins in a traditional skirt of the Puebla of the 19th century. However, this is juxtaposed by masculine gender markers like the mustache, the hat, and the bullet belt, which are all indicative of national symbols such as the macho Mexicano, embodied in revolutionaries like Pancho Villa. Her frame of Calla lilies refers to Diego Rivera, an iconic figure of Mexican culture, and his famous paintings like Vendedora de Flores, which depict Mexican peasant women selling lilies. Now, the multi-layers of this performance indicate the multi-layers of meaning which may become attached to symbols and elements of national culture. For example, her allusion to Rivera, a man as well known for his many infidelities to his wife Frida Kahlo as for his art, may be indicative of a society where male sexual promiscuity and infidelity seem to be condoned and where the pursuit of women's sexual pleasure is taboo. So in this sense, Haddad teases out the ironies and ambiguities in narratives, images and icons that are representative of a national identity, citing them literally on her body and on the stage. And the other image you can see there is Astrid wearing her multi-mamada costume, which is inspired by goddess Isis, the goddess of nourishment, which is portrayed in many cultures as a goddess with multiple breasts. And this costume consists of breasts of varying sizes, which in one performance had miniature male caricatures of Mexican men dangling from them. So her Haddad's characterization of Mexico as a giving mother whose body provides for everyone, regardless of circumstance, is a powerful allegory for the political, religious, and economic corruption that has existed and continues to exist in Mexico. Next, please. Thanks. So the Mexican Nobel Prize winner Octavio Paz asserts that the construction of national identity in post-revolutionary Mexico was posited in male domination, creating female stereotypes like the prostitute, the goddess, and the mother. So the stereotype of the prostitute can really be based on la Malinche or Maltzin. So you can see her there, an indigenous woman who was given to the conquistador Hernan Cortes by a Tabascan tribe, and she became Donna Marina, his translator, his mistress, and mother of one of his children. So Donna Marina was once very highly regarded by both indigenous people who ascribed her extraordinary power, and also by the Spanish for whom she represented an exemplary convert. We also have to think of she could negotiate in 3 languages, which is quite something. Not something I'm doing so well here, but I'll try. I'm trying. However, when Mexico became independent, the figure of Donna Marina transformed to Malinche, a symbol of national treachery, who embodied the conquest, betrayal, and humiliation of the nation. So La Malinche thus became the scapegoat for the fall of a nation, and she can be viewed in opposition to the savior of the nation in ways, the Virgin of Guadalupe, or the symbolic savior of the nation, indicating the creation of female binary archetypes in fitting with a dominant male nationalist narrative. So Haddad, who is of Lebanese, Mayan, and Mexican heritage, physically embodies this cultural other, which is similar to Malinche. Haddad is a mixed-race woman who uses her body in performance as a means of disrupting binaries and dominant nationalist narratives through demanding an open reading of identity in formation. And as you can see in the center here, her La Malinche costume blends elements of Aztec and Mayan heritage. Her headpiece, it holds 20 skulls, the calavera, which is also suggestive of the weight of the dead or the weight of history on her head, on her body, on her shoulders, as her movement is restricted by the costume. Next, please. So these are other examples of Haddad's work, and it's really important to note here that these costumes are really the scenography, form part of performances that involve singing, dancing, stories, and humour, and often to huge audiences, nationally and internationally. So Haddad has a large reach and accessibility as a performer, which is vital to the communication of her stance on the treatment of Mexican women, immigrants, and on patriarchal culture. I'm nearly there. I know there's a lot. So next, please. So I couldn't talk about performance and activism in Mexico without referring to the border with the US. So I'll just touch on that briefly here. It needs a whole lifetime. So here you can see the work of Guillermo Gomez Pena. He's one of Mexico's most well-known performance artists. And he has spent over 30 years working as an activist, an artist, and an educator. And most of his work concerns the interface between the Mexico and US border, the culture of that, and the politics of the brown body. His original interdisciplinary arts projects and books explore borders, immigration, cross-cultural and hybrid identities, and the confrontation and misunderstandings between cultures, languages, and races. He's also the artistic director of the performance troupe La Pocha Nostra. And La Pocha Nostra is a transdisciplinary arts organisation that provides a support network and forum for artists of various disciplines, generations, and ethnic backgrounds. So La Pocha is devoted to erasing the borders between art and politics, practice and theory, artist and spectator. I'd really recommend just looking them up, going to their website. And on this slide here, you can see a Wedding at the Border. I can't actually see the year. I think it's 1988, between Guillermo Pena and it's just it's an important one because in terms of activism, it just demonstrates the action of language as well, and how the declarative statement of I do is an action in itself in a marriage because it forms a legal binding. So it's just an interesting one. And below there, I think it's 1992, is Animal in a Cage in Madrid. Again, just looking at the ideas of the exotic other. Next, please. I just wanted to show this because I think they're two really, really powerful examples of performance as activism and art and performance. So the eyes through the border and the toddler is a French artist, J.R. he goes by. Just to say that the blown up image of the toddler is actually taken from a photograph of a toddler kind of peering over the bars of their cot, and that this toddler lives at the border. And down here, sorry, her name escapes me at the moment, you can see an artist painting the border blue, the sky blue. It's a peaceful attempt to eradicate or erase the border in ways, because if you stand back from it and if you see this from the distance, you cannot see the border. So it blends in with the sky. So I just thought that's a really piece of beautiful work. Next, please. Finally, I just want to draw your attention to the digital work I co-created with Astrid Haddad and another Mexican theatre artist, Tanya Gomez. And it was called Mi Cuerpo, Mi Casa, which means my body, my home. These are three collages that were designed for the project by Valentine Collin. It's a 35-minute piece based on each of our own personal narratives around the theme of home and the body, and it explored things like loss, body image, the theatre as home, motherhood, and immigration. It includes poetry, and there's a poetry from Natalie Toledo, and a reading of the letter I referred to earlier of Lydia Velázquez's letter for her daughter Diana. Next, please. And thank you. This reading was accompanied by photographs from an exhibition called Never to Return by Alejandra Edwards. You can see just three of those there. And in the middle, that's actually Lydia Velázquez. And I'm just drawing attention to this because I know from speaking to her that she wants to keep her daughter's name alive. She wants to keep the story out there. So I guess the more times I say it maybe there's an impact there, which really goes back to the theme of this whole presentation. So just on to the last slide, please. Thank you. Just the next one there. Yeah, thanks. So to finish, I just want to say I don't want to condense a complex history of Gaza or Mexico, in half an hour. And nor do I want to reduce the reality of living through war, femicide, violence and poverty in a few PowerPoint slides. So I've selected this information for presentation, yet I endeavour that this is a collaboration between the artists mentioned and their work and you, the audience, creating an assemblage of thoughts, images, ideas, provocations, even actions, possibly performance as activism. Thank you so much for listening to all of that. I know there was a lot in it. Thank you.
That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much to Maria for sharing her research with us. Those images were stunning. Before we move on to our next guest, we have to thank our latest pledge from Janice Barnes from Georgetown. She donated €100. Thank you so much, Janice. Remember, you can pledge to save TheatreMaker and keep the conversations going at TheatreMaker.ie/donate. Up next, we have Sadrine Dahiro with Crises of Futurity through the lens of African cultural text. Over to you, Sandrine.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So for my presentation, I'm just going to be looking at Crisis of Futurity through the African cultural lens. And with that, that's just a brief overview of what my project is on about. If I can just go to the next slide. Yeah, so just a little bit about myself. I am a second year PhD student in the University of Limerick in the English department. And aside from doing a PhD, I've also dabbled into filmmaking. So last year, I produced and directed a documentary called Unsilencing Black Voices alongside my colleague Katrina Sokoya and Alison Byrne, where we documented the lived experiences of the Black and Irish community, where we thought that it was about time to kind of start that national conversation in regards to racism, and just open up that conversation on like the changing nature of Irishness. And I am just in the process now of working on the second documentary, which again will explore this meaning of Irishness, but from a local, intimate perspective of my hometown, Carlow. So aside from that, also, I'm really interested in this sense of the changing nature of Irishness. So I look at that also through literary perspective. So last year, alongside my colleague Gareth Bryn and Professor Margaret Harper, we started an interdisciplinary magazine where we invite artists, activists, writers, and anyone really to come in and talk about, like, through different forms of expressions, whether or not that's through literature, art, music, anything like that, to engage in the different social issues of Ireland. And with that magazine, it's called Unapologetic, and we're just in the process of completing our first issue, which we hope to release on the 8th of October 2021. And again, just to provide a safe space and a safe board there for different individuals in society who have felt that they have been brushed aside when talking about social issues in Ireland. So I'm really excited about that. Next slide. So my main area of research, I'm really interested in different perspectives, but so in my research, there's kind of two different elements of it. So there's the element of time, which is kind of comes with the theoretical framework of called temporality. And then I look at the other framework of environmentalism, and especially just with climate change, and that through and the Anthropocene narrative. So I've always been interested in the concept of time in Africa because when I did my undergrad in UL, when it came to English and history, and even with my MA, whenever there was cultural text that referred to the African character, it was always in one that was stipulated to have no future, because the future is assumed that is something that has already come and gone in the African continent. So I've always been really fascinated by that sense on why within colonial text, and even now when we look at it, why the African character is always described as a person that is incapable of accessing the future, just because they are considered to be stuck in a primitive stage. Like earlier thinkers like Hegel had said that they're stuck as children that are not catching up to the rest of the grown-up world, which is in fact Europe. So through that, then I kind of split it up in three different aspects when it comes to understanding time in the African context. So I look at it through the post-colonial reading. So this is, I look at that through the term of futurity, which is predominantly perceived through the Western temporal framework. So again, with that, it just assumes that only those that reside in the West are capable of having a future, because they are interwoven with the concept of modernity and progress, and they're all signs that lead to the future. So, and then with that, the second element when looking at time is the formerly colonized experience of it. So the formerly colonized are continuously described as helpless victims of time, stuck in a mythic state of existence, just waiting and watching time pass by. So I look at that through, there's a famous Kenyan playwright called Nana, where he looks at it in a satirical piece called How to Write About Africa. And in that, he talks about how, again, like the African character is always described as a refugee, or just someone who is just waiting around for the benevolence of the West. So again, only those that reside in the West, through them coming to the African continent, are able to allow them or pave a way for them to access that future, which again, this is a false narrative, but it's a narrative that has always been projected on. And we can see that in contemporary realities when we look at issues such as the white savior complex. So we've seen that in movies and charities and everything like that. So again, that stipulates in that conversation with time in regards to the formerly colonized. And then I look at how I disrupt that knowledge of, again, like the formerly colonized and that concept of futurity, by looking at third generation African writers who are again troubling this notion that African characters have no future. Instead, they're actually tapping into this notion of how African characters and the formerly colonized do interact with time, but they do it in a way that disrupts our Western understanding of it. So this is through oral tradition, storytelling, anything like that. They're always talking about the future. So again, it's a future that is different from the one that we see in the West, but nevertheless, it's still a future. So I look at how, again, contemporary realities are interacting with time, as Africans' engagement with time is visible through the mediums of proverbs, folk tales, prophecies, and oral tradition, as they act as prime examples of the fluidity of time and how the African interacts with the moving changes of time itself. So an example is, I look at different prophecies in regions in South Africa, especially in the Tosa tribe, where again they projected a future before apartheid. So again, I'm just looking at that with showing the visible elements of how there are features of futurity there, and even through folk tales or anything like that, even through songs. So like in my current chapter now, I'm looking at the Sengwe tribe in Kenya, and even there, like their songs is about how their land was colonized and was taken away from them. So like again, it's disrupting their understanding of self, but then through their refusal to leave the land, they're staying there because they understand that this land will be something that is important for future generations. So again, there's an emphasis there on the concept of future, because they're able to think about what has yet to come. Next slide. So in my aspect of time, I look at that through this theoretical framework of modernity and progress. So we have like contemporary African theorists such as Cameroon Achille Membe. He stipulates that again, like the West have self-assigned themselves as sole curators and carriers of the concept of modernity and progress. So it's only those that reside in the West are capable of accessing the future, and anyone else is doomed to fail. So with that, then I look at that through how Western filmmakers, so again through like different films, have always stipulated that sense that again you go into the African continent, and again it's just portrayed as one country as opposed to the 53 countries of Africa. So stuff like that. So again, there, by stipulating it under that, those Western films always project on this sense that, okay, all of Africa, again, in that one single homogenic lens, are backwards and are primitive and are still acting like childlike because they're still attached to their traditional roots. So again, the films never really explore like what's this deep connection with culture and tradition. Instead, they kind of explore it in that sense of a stereotypical racial manner of justifying to why, again, we need us in the West need to go and save Africa. So it steps into that. And then again, I always look at, again, how Western scholars and writers, so through colonial text, again, how they describe the African character. And as I stated, this is a character that with a lot of the time, so like with examples such as Joseph Conrad, who wrote Heart of Darkness, like with that, like when he was talking about Congo, like any of his Black characters, African characters, like they didn't have a voice. So again, even that's kind of the recipe that a lot of colonial texts have carried, where a lot of the African characters are spoken for as opposed to having their own voice. And again, this kind of feeds into that sense of, oh, they're childlike and they need the adult world in the West who speak on their behalf. So through all of those, they all intertwine with that sense of modernity and progress. And lastly, then, through that modernity and progress, I do look at that state of how the African and the formerly colonized are all described like stuck in this static mode of dependency, where again, they're constantly waiting for the benevolence of the West to save them and to put them in conversation with time. And as I stated, this is a false narrative, as we've seen for centuries. They've always been interacting with time, but it's just one that disrupts our understanding of it. Next slide. So through that, then when I was thinking about all of these different ideas, I came across this concept of futurity and how in Africa it has multiple frames that engage with the concept of futurity. So as I've already stated, and it was eye-opening for me, because even though, like, yes, I had known of prophecies and different folk tales from my parents, I hadn't understood that it had like multiple competing frameworks that again were constantly debunking this false myth that the African future has come and gone. So I thought that once I discovered that, it was something that I really, really wanted to continuously delve into it and trace back all the different forms of futurity. So I traced it back. So I kind of started in the past, and I started it looking at it through like the transatlantic slavery, and then I looked at it through colonialism, post-colonialism, and now neoliberalism and neocolonialism, and just this concept of contemporary realities. And again, how through time in and out, like the past, present, and future have always like intertwined and weaved in and out. So again, these were things that are constantly brushed over when you think about the post-colonial voice, that again, there's these false notion that time or anything like that did not start moving until periods of slavery. But again, like the formerly enslaved had already lived in the African continent for centuries and had coexisted with each other and the environment right before eras of slavery and colonialism. So it was really interesting for me to kind of trace it back, and even trace it back earlier to like 5 BC with earlier thinkers such as Aristotle and Plato, and to see like what way they thought about like that concept of time and what classifies as time and everything like that. So it's been really, really interesting to do like to trace it all back to that. And then so through my discovery of tracing that back, I kind of came across then with third generation African writers who are using a unique and imaginative tool to address the issue of temporality. So again, they're departing from earlier writers such as Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe and Kenyan writer Gungu Watango, like where again these third generation African writers are tapping into these contemporary realities, so such as issues of climate change, and are centralizing and humanizing the African character and making sure that like the audience that reads it understands that although like their work would be fictional or anything like that, it still taps into like the contemporary reality of it. And again, how those characters are able to reflect on the here and now, but are also able to look at how they were treated in the past and project what they would like to in the future. So again, immediately the reader is thrown into this world where they understand how the formerly colonized is in fact able to interact with time and is able to pave a new route of accessing the future. Again, a recipe that earlier Western writers had denied them the right to. Yeah, next slide, please. So with that, so like what I was mentioning earlier before, it was like, again, in regards to when we look at futurity, I wanted to kind of explain why, again, when you're talking about the future, like, yes, everyone is entitled to the future and everyone can access it, but why is it a big deal when it comes to the tension between the West and Africa? And why is it that only those that reside in the West are projected to have this sense of futurity while the African characters can't? So this is true, like that, the theory of temporal framework, where again, earlier thinkers have all stipulated that only in the West is the future accessible, because in the West it works in a linear time frame. So where again it just goes from past, present, and future. While if we can just go to the next slide. While in Africa it is stipulated, and again this is a false sense of it, that time only works in a cyclical framework where it only goes past to present and it can never go to the future. So again, this is something that Western thinkers have stated, but also some earlier African thinkers, so such as Kenyan philosopher John Mbiti, where he talked about this in regards to, the African characters and the African themselves cannot tap into the future because they can only think about time in a maximum and minimum 2-year period. So again, it only works through the past and the present, which again, third generation African writers are really troubling and are paving way to understand how the future is actually accessible through their multiple works. If I can move to the next slide. So again, through the fact that in Africa, time is described as cyclical, I just want to kind of just give a brief overview of why it's described like that. So as I stated earlier, with the Kenyan philosopher John Mbiti, who also supports this view, underlines how time is split up into like 3 different elements. So in one is time is understood through events. So movements of time occur through the comings and goings of events rather than time itself moving. So this justifies why he states that, again, that's something that can only be projected onto 2 years and it can't go above 2 years. And then the other element of it is, again, how the formerly colonized is always described to be stuck in a timeless state of existence where they're not moving. So the African subject is reduced to the role of a mere spectator in a timeless state where he or she is just waiting for events to come and go without him or herself moving. So again, these are falsified myths, but have been something that has been supported and replicated time and time again. And then lastly, then it's in this regards to this reductive description of time. So there's a reductive nature of describing African time just under a broad stroke that sees all Africans being incapable of accessing the future, as they're considered to only operate in a 2-dimensional reality of past and present. So as I stated again, like with my research, I'm really, really interested in all the writers, filmmakers, and everything like that, whether or not they were African or reside in the West, who partook in this reductive nature, and kind of like delve into like why they thought that, and why, again, like the African character is only described to work at this 2-dimensional. But then it's also an exciting time because through that I'm able to find new films and books and everything like that trouble this notion of this 2-dimensional and tapping into the futurity. So it's like a really exciting element of the research now. Next slide, please. So through this discovery, then I started asking myself the question of, it's like, again, like why why is the African future described as unattainable? Because as I stated, like, we're all capable of accessing the future, but why is it that there's this projection that has been there for centuries, as I stated? Why is it that the formerly colonized is still described, even now in our contemporary reality, as incapable of accessing the future unless they reside in the West, or unless they tap into all aspects of modernity and progress? So I traced it back then to different elements of it. So I narrowed it down to 4, and I'm still in my early part of my research, so I'll probably be able to find more. But as of now, over the last 2 years, I've narrowed it down to these 4 elements. So I narrowed it down to slavery. So like, even during the slavery era, again, the African future was something that was not seen, because they were, during slavery and colonialism, I kind of describe them as the formerly enslaved going through this sense of apocalyptic future, where again, they were just facing their death and they were not sure if they were going to overcome this. So it makes sense to why the future was something that seemed very far-fetched and impossible of accessing. So that was for slavery and colonialism. Then I started thinking about it then, like, after colonialism and with the liberation, why again was that future something that was still described as unattainable if the formerly enslaved and formerly colonized had overcome these 2 apocalyptic events? Then I narrowed that down to like the short-lived liberation. So I look at that in the sense of the failed post-colonial dreams. So when different countries such as Kenya and Nigeria were all gaining independence, again, they were very quick to try to attain to this sense of modernity and catching up to the rest of the world in order to showcase why why colonialism and everything like that was a failed mission, because colonialism mission was just to civilize the barbaric Africans, where again, this was in a falsified myth. So through that liberation, there were still issues that happened where, like, it still brought up abject poverty. We had issues just with environmental degradation and everything like that. So through that, even though the formerly colonized were now free, their future was still something that was uncertain, as the countries were just trying to rebuild themselves and trying to have a new sense of what it means to be free. So again, that sense of the future was something that wasn't as straightforward, because there was still certain sense of the uncertainty and fear. And then again, in my last observation of this unattainable future is in regards to that stolen future, and that's where my interest in environmentalism and why I'm linking this together comes into play, because through the exploitation of the different natural resources in different geopolitical settings within the African continent, by extracting these natural resources, it is cutting short the future of the locals and everything like that. So through this interaction where we're seeing multinational oil companies in the West and Western environmentalists, again, this is being seen as a stolen future for the formerly colonized. So that's where I've kind of narrowed it down to. And with that, then, if I can just move to the next slide. So again, through narrowing that down, I've had like a better understanding of how temporality is working and how environmentalism is all coincide together and how they coexist together. So it kind of brought me up then to look at that through where in my PhD research, I've split up my 4 chapters into elements of literary and just cultural texts. So my first chapter, it just looks at work of fiction. My second chapter looks at biography and memoir. My third chapter looks at film. And my 4th chapter will look at art. So again, through that, I'm trying to move away from this homogenic description of the African continent and even the environmental issues by showcasing them through different modes of expression. So even with that, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to be focusing just on the concept of the African literature, and again, how that's informing my understanding of temporality when it comes to the concept of time and environmental studies. So again, here I've stated that African writers during the colonial era started writing as a form of producing counter-narratives of anti-Blackness. So there, in my first chapter, I am using writers such as Helen Habila, Chinua Achebe, and everything like that to kind of stipulate that and understand what it means to be writing and from producing counter-narratives of anti-Blackness rhetoric, which again project their characters into the concept of futurity. So African writers started to self-assign themselves the task of writing about competing elements of temporality within the African continent. And through their work, they're really making sure to highlight and make it central that the past is constantly submerging itself into the present. And again, third generation African writers pushes that further by showcasing how time is weaved in, past, present, and future are all weaved in together. Yeah, next slide, please. This just moves me on then to like why I chose third generation African writers. And as I stated, so like in my earlier degrees, like when I was in fourth year, that's when I first came to know contemporary African literature. And there, like I was introduced to just first and second generation African writers. So I've had experience with their way of thinking, and again how they were able to talk about colonialism and slavery. But for my PhD, especially when looking at the concept of the future, I wanted to situate and understand contemporary African writers now and their understanding of the future as they're able to borrow past knowledges from those earlier first generation African writers. So I picked third generation African writers because they are tackling the issue of temporality and environmentalism by looking at creative ways to address how environmental issues within the African continent that halt the inhabitants and the ability to access the future. So again, they are engaging with this and using all the different aspect of, again, time and environmentalism and just putting that all in conversation with each other, which I just find very exciting and just becomes more becomes more open-minded there, because I'm able to tap into the first and second generation writers, and even now with the third generation writers, they're continuously producing new and new material. So like I have a lot of reading to do, and it's helping a lot because I just have a better understanding of it, because even through these third generation African writers, when you're reading their work, you can see their earlier influences, which again gives me like a better understanding of what past writers thought and why like they weren't able to bridge that gap in regards to thinking about the future, about why these new third generation African writers are hitting the nail there with this expression. And yeah, next slide, please. So through all my work there in regards to situating the third generation African writers and different cultural texts, when looking at environmentalism, I struggle now to kind of understand what theoretical approach I was going to take. So as I stated, I always knew that I wanted to talk about time and environmentalism, but putting them two in conversation together, I found it tricky, but I came across this theoretical approach that I'll be using throughout, I've been using throughout my entire research, and it's continuously growing. So the theoretical approach I came across and I'm using is eco-criticism. So eco-criticism looks at the intimate relationship between literature and the environment as it paves way for human beings to have a better understanding of their surrounding environment and to develop a more in-depth relationship with the non-human world. So with this, when I came across this perfect relationship between man and nature, and then placing it within the African continent, I thought that it would work really well together. And especially when I came across this theory, then I was able to see how even through eco-criticism, this theory is approached in a very Eurocentric manner, where again, it's only Western environmentalisms that are really delving into this. And there are some Western scholars which are delving into this and are bringing up the post-colonial voice, but again, the post-colonial voice is something that's still missing. So straight away with this theory, I was able to see the gap of where my research fits in perfectly, because I use the post-colonial voice when addressing these environmental issues. So this theory just really opened up room for me to get a better understanding of my thesis, but then also understand and situate my thinking and my approach in this larger discussion of environmentalism and temporality. So it's really, really exciting that there's the lack of research that's done there when it comes to post-colonial voice, that my research will be able to contribute to that. And yeah, next slide, please. So with the theoretical approach there with eco-criticism, I was able to again resituate myself in this ongoing discussion within the humanities, especially environmental humanities, of the Anthropocene discourses, because again, the future is something that is being talked about in regards to environmentalism when we see the issues of climate change, because all of our futures within climate change is projected to be doomed, because we are currently in the sixth extinction of climate change. So I wanted to again complicate my thinking and reintroduce this concept of the Anthropocene while looking at eco-criticism and futurity, and put them all together and understand and have a better understanding of that concept of the future, especially the African future. So in this age of the Anthropocene, it looks at how, again, human activities influences over the environment is central to the Anthropocene narrative. So it measures the human impact of the environment with examples such as climate issues, such as increased carbon footprint. So I thought that the Anthropocene narrative works really well when it comes to looking at the future of the African continent, especially in this era of climate change, just because within the African continent, it is projected to be, it is the hardest hit when it comes to climate change, yet the African continent is contributing the least amount when it comes to the climate change issues. So I wanted to again look at that into why again is it that the African continent is still projected this sense of doomsday scenario when it comes to climate change, even though we're all supposed to be facing it. And although they only contribute to I think it was like just 4% of the carbon footprint. So again, it just complicates that notion and makes it very exciting when it comes to approaching that discussion on, again, that doomsday narrative, and looking at it from the African perspective, but then also from the European perspective, because with climate change, it kind of stipulates this notion of how Europe is dying. But then again, how do we turn that over when we're looking at how for centuries the African continent has always been described as that continent that is dying, but now in this new conversation with climate change, Europe is one which is described as a continent that is dying. So yeah, next slide, please. So through that discussion then, as I stated, like when I was talking about it earlier, it really paves the way to understand when we're talking about climate change and time, really to understand and bring together all these important voices. So again, one of the elements of it that I've seen in my research is time and time again, there's this absence of the post-colonial voice when it comes to environmental issues. And again, it's the post-colonial voice is always missing in every issues, but when it comes to environmental issues and the topic of futurity and everything like that, again, the African voice is just brushed aside, just because, again, it has been projected as a continent that has no future. So why would they be included in these conversations? And it's something that has become very interesting, especially like now when we are looking at climate change, and especially now in the era of Greta Thunberg and everything like that, where we are seeing more and more people talking about climate change. But again, even with that, I don't know if anyone has noticed in regards to that, it's still from a very Eurocentric perspective. So I remember even last year there was a climate change summit, and even there they took a picture in the Huffington Post, and the only Black African environmentalist, Vanessa Nakate from Uganda, her picture was cut out. And again, so that even stipulated that notion that like the African voice when it comes to environmental issues is not needed. And even though like the photographer apologized for editing that picture out, it was a very strong message to show and stipulate that again, that, oh, when it comes to environmental issues or anything like that, and talking about the future and talking about something like climate change, which affects all of us human beings, the African voice, again, is just brushed to the side and is viewed as unimportant. So when I saw that picture again, it reinstated and kind of made me more excited about my project, because again, it was showing what I was saying, like in stating that like you cannot cut out the post-colonial voice when it comes to talking about the future. So again, with this, then I'm really showcasing how Eurocentric, your environmental discourses leaves out the post-colonial voice, as Eurocentric, as eco-criticism continuously is presented within a singular, Eurocentric and Americanized frame with little to no room for African voices to be included in this important conversation. So again, environmental issues within the African continent are brushed aside and are seen as just another issue to add to the myriad of issues already presented in the continent. So on an international scale, the African voice is silenced, if not altogether missing, when it comes to addressing the impact of climate change in the African continent. So again, when it comes to refugee crisis, where again, little to no research is done to out of those refugee crises that come out of the African continent, how many of them are actually climate refugees? And again, this sense of climate refugees is only a new term that has started being used. So like that's what my research really touches on. And yeah, next slide. So again, just to kind of go back to my title of the presentation, which kind of again ties this all back together, is it's really important that even though in the age of the Anthropocene, so again in the age that we're on now with this doomsday narrative, everyone's future becomes uncertain in the face of climate change, but the Africans are the ones that are hit hardest, even though they contribute less to the deterioration of our climate compared to their Western counterparts. So I just thought it's really important to highlight that again, even though our future, everyone's future is uncertain, and especially when it comes to climate change, is to really like reinstate this notion of how only those that reside in the African continent are constantly brushed aside, and again reinstated that they will never be able to access the future, just because even in the age of climate change, that they still will not be able to access that future, because again they are stuck in this state of existence where they're just watching time pass by. Yeah, next slide. So with that in mind, just some elements that I'm looking for my research is a need to move away from the perception that the African subject is a subject that is a helpless victim when it comes to time. So with that, like I'm really trying to ensure that by using different examples of African cultural texts and literature, and through this engagement of the Anthropocene and this engagement of climate change, to really disrupt this notion of viewing African characters, and again, even just in contemporary realities, African people as these helpless victims. Because again, by understanding that and pushing beyond that, we can see how the African person and like the African characters through these books have always been engaging with time. And as I stated in my earlier part of the presentation, their concept of time and the way they interact with it is just something that is just different from the way the West sees it. So through my research, I just really want to reinstate this and reintroduce this new way of thinking and understanding when Western writers, filmmakers, anything like that are approaching the African continent and are trying to project on this false narrative when it comes to the African character. Yeah, next, thank you. So through my research then, so like as I stated, that was my first aim. And then my second aim is to really engage in this sense of temporal engagement, and to showcase through my research how like there's a reemergence of planetary consciousness where it is no longer acceptable to brush aside environmental issues that are disseminating the African landscape and curtailing the chances of accessing the future. So by my selected works, I want to showcase how, again, like how this sense of suffering or anything like that is true environmental degradation, where again it is something that is impacting the African continent. So my research, that I hope that, again, like firstly, by moving beyond this sense of the African being a helpless victim of time, but also this sense of climate change not being a real issue in Africa and just being brushed aside and seen as something that is just another element of the instability that is there in the African continent. I really want to engage with these conversations and showcase how with this sense of instability or anything like that, an element of it, an element that must be taken seriously and be put center stage is climate change issues, and again, which curtail the chances of the African of accessing the future. Yeah, next slide, please. So I just want, so just from my last slide there is just in regards to like just the African future and like what's next in that regards. So I really, with my research, I want to highlight and again centralize this notion of how African temporality reconfigures and troubles the notion of the future and offers us a more nuanced way of understanding our relationship with time and what comes next. And then through that, again, I want to make sure to highlight how Africans are situated in an alternative future where they can solve their own problems without the interference of foreign powers. So again, something that really disrupts this notion of white savior complex. And lastly, then, how in the African continent, time weaves in and out of the three temporal dimensions. So again, with the past, present, and future, and to just always ensure that that's something that is highlighted. So yeah, that's it for now. And I just think on the last slide, my email is there. Yeah, so just a slide after that. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandrine, for sharing your research and insights with us. It has been a pleasure to have Sandrine as a part of our festival. Coming up, we're going to dive into the TheatreMaker archives for the conversations with the legend that is Simon Delaney and playwright Nancy Harris. While you're watching, don't forget to share this stream with your friends and colleagues and help us spread the word about our fundraising campaign. We need your help to keep the conversations going. Now, let's dive into those archives.
I'm joined now by the wonderful Simon Delaney. Most of you will recognise Simon from presenting on Ireland AM, and who could forget him in the brilliant Bachelor's Walk. His career spans both the big and small screens, the stage, and more recently, the kitchen. So Simon, you have worn many hats over the years. You've been an actor, director, writer, producer, and presenter. Do you have a favourite, or do you like that it's varied?
I think it's the current gig that you're doing at the time. That's the one that becomes your favourite because it's the one you're focused on. I remember doing a film years ago with Sir Michael Gambon and asking him that exact question about whether he preferred, in terms of acting, whether he preferred theatre or film. And he answered and he said, and I thought it was very true, he said, when you're on set and you're on set for 14, 16 hours a day and you're bored hanging around, you wish that you were doing a theatre show where you just had to go in for a couple of hours at night. And then on the flip side, when you're in theatre and you're doing the same show every night, 8 shows a week, you're wishing, God, I wish I was on a film set. So I think it depends on whatever the job is you're doing at the time, that's the one you're focused on. But I think an actor's home is on stage. A director's home is behind the lens, but an actor's home is on stage. That's the one we all love doing the most.
Absolutely. And you have had a lot of experience in musicals, and that's obviously what we're talking about this week on Stage Door Live. So what for you makes musicals so popular in Ireland?
You know, I think as a genre, it's probably my favorite form of theatre, because I think it's just pure and utter escapism. I mean, you know, we hear this age-old adage that a piece of music can take you somewhere. You know, if we hear a piece of music from our childhood, or it creates a memory of when we were younger, there's something about live music, and I'm talking about concerts or operas, but just there's something about being in a room and hearing an orchestra strike up. And I think then when you add on top of that a good book, be it a drama or a comedy, there's nothing quite like it. I mean, it's the escapism thing, but I think it's just attacks all senses with the live
Yes.
music. And for me, it's the purest form of theatre.
Absolutely. And, you know, I completely agree with you. You know, every time I've gone to see a musical, it's kind of one of the only times that I ever feel like I get complete goosebumps when a
Yeah,
song strikes up and the band
yeah.
strikes up or the orchestra. So why do you think then, Simon, that sometimes there can be a little bit of snobbery towards musicals?
I think when people say to you, "I don't like musicals," I just think I always say to them, "Well, you haven't seen the right ones." You know, I mean, if you go back to Hollywood's heyday, you know, where they churned out the majority of film that they churned out were musicals, because that's what the audiences wanted. You know, I think that might have given musicals a bad name. But if you go back and look at the back catalogue of the classics, the now classics like Showboat, Oklahoma, Calamity Jane, they're great movies, but they're also great musicals. And I think moving forward, then, you know, there were some musicals that were ahead of their time. And I think the greatest musical ever written, and my favorite, West Side Story, is an example of a perfect piece of theatre. I mean, if somebody says to you, "I don't like musicals," well, sit them down and let them watch West Side Story, because it's based on the greatest love story ever told, Romeo and Juliet, and it has probably the greatest musical score ever written. There isn't a bad note of music in the show.
No.
So I think it's a case of us having to re-educate the audiences, particularly people who say they don't like musical theatre. But if you look at the product over the last maybe 15 years in Ireland and in the West End and Broadway, you know, a lot of it's jukebox musicals. You look at you know, a lot of movies that are turned into musicals, The Bodyguard, stuff like that. And again, people might think, no, not for me. But I think they just need to give it a chance. I mean, you can find
Yeah.
a genre, a subject that you like, and you'll
Yeah.
probably find a musical about it. I mean, musical theatre for me can make you laugh and can make you cry, and that's what theatre's about.
Absolutely, absolutely. A full-on experience, a
Yeah,
roller coaster of emotion.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. So there's been a massive increase in formal theatre training in Ireland in the last
Mm.
number of years. Have you seen a change in the industry here that reflects that?
I have. I mean, I always feel like a bit of a cheat when I'm talking about formal theatre training, because I had none. I've never had a day's training in my life when you know, in terms of acting. But I mean, I've been an ambassador at the Lear Theatre or the Lear Academy, I should say, for a number of years, and I see it myself when I'm on the other side of the casting table when I'm directing. Just the standard of people who are coming into the room to audition. You know, back in the day, I think particularly with musical theatre, you know, if you had any grow or ambition towards a career in musical theatre, you know, you had to get on a plane and you had to go and study in London or elsewhere.
Yeah,
Now there are various courses that you can do here that are becoming recognised as, you know, renowned qualifications. So that's a great start. I think we need more of it here.
yeah,
uh, I think we need to specialize more in musical theatre, because, you know, the West End outsells Hollywood. You know, the West End and Broadway,
yeah,
the product,
yeah,
musical theatre, it's a it's a high revenue stream when it comes to the entertainment business, and I think we should take a little bit more, be a little bit more aware of that here in Ireland, because we have the talent, we have the actors, we have the writers, and I think to nurture that, we need to develop a little bit more homegrown musical theatrical studies. So we give our students a chance to develop here instead of having to up sticks and move to London, live away from home for a couple of years, and then try and ply their trade. If they can leave here with the qualification and then hit London and then hit the US, that would help.
Absolutely. It would be nice to keep some of us here, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. And you're so right about musicals, outselling Hollywood. And hopefully, after all this, I'd say everybody would be ready for a musical. What do you think, Simon? I think
Well, this is it. I mean, see, I think the problem is, Kelly, that there's no doubt that there's a huge appetite for musical theatre here. You only have to look at what the Bord Gáis Energy Theatre has done since its arrival. It was built with a specific reason. It was built to take in the product, the West End and Broadway product, and the audiences flock to it. Now, some actors would say it's a great initiative, but it's not providing a lot of work for Irish actors and Irish performers because it's a touring house. So a lot of shows will just drop in. And that is true. But what it does prove is that the audience is here for it. So that should tell people and theatres around the country that, you know what, maybe if we want to fill our theatres, maybe we should put a couple of more musicals in there, but cast them locally, cast them within. And I don't just mean actors, I mean musicians, maybe that will help, because I think theatre producers will tend to shy away from musical because they're so bloody expensive to put on.
Yeah, they are spectacles, and that's
spectacles,
part and parcel of it.
If you put an orchestra into a theatre, that's expensive. It doesn't matter what the musical is, it's expensive. And then you add in choreography on top of that, dancers, choreographer, and then your normal expenses. You've got your cast, your lighting, your costume, sound. They're expensive to run, but Cameron McIntosh wouldn't be running musicals if there wasn't money in them, and he is.
No. Yeah, exactly. Well, on that note, what makes a good musical, in your opinion?
I think it's just got to be a musical that moves you, and it moves you to tears, either through comedy or through tragedy. Some of the best musicals I've seen are comedies. I saw Dirty Rotten Scoundrels on Broadway, Avenue Q. I remember seeing the original cast of that on Broadway. And probably one of my favorites, I already touched on West Side Story, but The Producers is one of the greatest musicals I think ever written.
Yeah, that's a classic.
It is. And please God, it's a role that I'd love to play before I shuffle off this mortal coil. I'd love to have a go at Max Bialystock. But there's so many good ones.
I'd definitely go to see that. I would, absolutely. So would the whole country, Simon. We'd be all there.
But you know what? I love the classics too, Kelly. I love Fiddler on the Roof is a great show. And I love some of the big old musicals, and then some of the contemporary ones. Maybe not so contemporary, but The Hired Man is a gorgeous piece of musical theatre, and that's one that
I haven't seen that one actually. I haven't seen.
It's an incredible piece, and you know what? It's a piece of musical theatre that a lot of the amateur groups put on for a number of reasons. The cast is split, so there's a nice balance between male and female parts, but also it's only a 4-piece orchestra, so it tends to be handy on the budget. But the musical score is incredible. The story is incredible. So, in terms of what makes a good musical, it can be anything. It can be absolutely anything. Some of the greatest musicals have very little dialogue in them, so the book doesn't have to be a huge part of it. It's about the score, and then flip that. There's some other musicals where it's all about the book and the music is just an underscore. So anything really, but whatever moves you.
So if you are going to see West Side Story, one of your favorites, are you able to now switch off and enjoy it, or do you ever kind of find yourself analysing it and thinking, "Oh, I would have done that now a bit differently"?
Yeah, well, so look, actors do that anyway. You know how many actors does it take to change a light bulb? 101, one to do it, and 100 to say, "I could have done that better." But now, I find it hard sometimes to sit there and think. To not critique it, but what I tend to do now and have done over the last 10 years or so is I'll tend to take an attitude of I'm going to go here and try to learn something. I go and try and watch a musical to see what the director might be doing with it. And I love when I'm sitting there and I go, geez, I never thought of that. That's a great way of staging that. What a lovely idea. I find myself doing that rather than going, no, I didn't like her. Now she was a bit flat when she came to that big area. That doesn't interest me.
We could all take
but
a
I
leaf
tend,
out of your book then, Simon.
well, you try to as best you can. I mean, actors are a terrible audience anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
We all know
definitely.
that when we come to preview
Yeah.
plays and the audience is filled with theatrical students, and you think, Christ, this is going to be a hard house. You know what I mean? Because they're all sitting there going, well, I auditioned for it and I didn't get it. This is awful. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know what he's doing that I didn't do in the audition.
Oh, that's so true, so true. But yeah, Simon, there seems to be an exciting new landscape of Irish-made musical theatre emerging, from Angela's Ashes on one side and Copperface Jacks on the other, which was a huge hit, right down to exciting chamber musicals on the fringe. So what kind of musicals do you think will be made, or what would you like to see being made in Ireland over the next few years?
I think it's important that we do musicals that people want to see. And I think that's a general rule when it comes to theatre. There is a time and a place for what I would describe as high art. But at the end of the day, particularly now, um, audiences are key. In other words, income is key. And again, going back to amateur musical theatre, which is where I started, we used to always complain every year when we'd gather in the hall to hear what show the committee had chosen. And when they mentioned Oklahoma, we all went, Jesus, can we not do something modern? And we used to always say, why do you keep picking Oklahoma and Greece? And they're saying, because they fill the hall, because they fill the theatre. Because if we don't fill the theatre, we're not doing a play later on in the year, and we won't be doing a panto at the end of the year. So I think we have to be careful in terms of what we put on. But again, go back to something I said earlier on. There's no doubt about it that the talent is here, and not just actors, writers, musicians, composers. They're all here. We have them in abundance, and they need supporting. And that is what I would say regional theatre is for. And the M50 circuit, the Driocht, the Civic. We need to give these spaces over to Irish creative people. And see their new product, because in the States they have a system where a show won't go direct to Broadway. It'll trial in Connecticut, it'll trial in Canada before it goes in. So make those shows, or make those theatres the spaces for our trials. Trial new stuff, put it on for a week somewhere. The likes of Copperface Jacks, nobody thought that was going to work. Phenomenal success. About to go into its third year of a run. Michael Collins, written by the late great Brian Flynn. Phenomenal show. That show needs to be on a stage in the West End or on Broadway. Nobody can tell me that American Broadway audiences wouldn't lap up Michael Collins. Of course they would.
Absolutely.
So
Irish history, very important.
Yeah, but we need to use the spaces that we have available to promote Irish artists, Irish creatives. Places like the Axis in Ballymun, who are phenomenal at doing things like that. Those spaces need to be utilised, but then again, we need to be careful that the stuff that we put on is going to make people want to come into the theatre and spend their money.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're dead right there. It's just, and you're so right. Ireland is just so spoiled with the talent that we have in every area of the arts, So if people, I mean, it's a good time, I suppose, for people to get their heads together and start creating stuff like that for when people are ready to get back into the theatres. Because I know I miss it. I miss going into the theatre desperately. So I'll be ready for something beautiful and new to cheer me up when I get back.
Well,
into
look,
the
it's the one thing that's carried us all through this mayhem and madness of COVID has been the arts, because we were all told to stay at home. And the first thing we did was switch on the TV. And what were we watching? We're watching creative people do what they do. We've kept the world going for the last 5 months. So if and when we do get back to doing what we do, they'll come back and support us. Of course they will.
Yes, they have to realise now, they have to value it, a bit more than they have in the past.
Yeah.
So last question for you, Simon. And
my favourite colour is red, Kelly, just in case that's the last question. Was that it today?
My son will be delighted to hear that, because he's been asking everyone their favourite colour. That's his interview question of the moment,
Well,
is
tell
what's
him
your favourite
it's
colour?
red.
So
I hope it's the right answer. But what's your last question, Kelly?
My last question is, do you have any advice for any burgeoning actors, writers, directors out there? What could you say to
Don't
them
do it.
to keep them
Don't do
going?
it. Go and get a trade. Learn how to be a plumber or a carpenter. Don't do it. Now, what I would say to them is, you know what? It's a very, very, very tough way to make a living. You need determination. You need, although you mightn't think it, you need a bit of a business brain on you because it is a business. The clue's in the
Yeah.
title. It's called show business. You need the right people around you. But you also need you need to be a dreamer. I think you need to be willing to jump off the cliff now and again, because we all face that point in our lives where, I know for me, I was doing amateur musical theatre and I was doing more of it and more of it and more of it, and I had a job, and I came to a point when I was 26 and I thought, right, I have to either give this a go or forget about it. And what I didn't want to become was that 50-year-old sitting in the bar going, yeah, I used to do a lot of amateur musical theatre. I'm sure I could have went on and done it professionally. So I jumped off the cliff and said I'd give it a go for 12 months. And that was 20 years ago. So you need determination. You need a
We're all glad
serious...
that you jumped off the cliff, Simon. We're all delighted because we've been enjoying your career for the last 20 years, and you've
You're
really
very
brought so
kind.
much joy to everyone who's watched your performances. And I can safely say that last year you in The Snapper was just one of the best pieces of theatre I'd seen in a long time, and one of the best performances. So
And God
yeah, and I
bless you. It
think
was a
you're
great
right.
show. It was a great show.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you were fantastic in it. Listen, Simon, you've been an absolute gent here today,
Not
and
at all.
yeah, thank you so much for joining us here
A
on Stage
pleasure.
Door Live. And yeah, I mean, everybody's going to be delighted to take on your advice, and there'll be jumping off cliffs left, right, and centre.
I hope so. Follow your dreams, lads. Listen, what's the worst that
Yeah,
can happen? At the end of the
yeah,
day,
exactly.
at least you can say you gave it a go. But stick with it. If it's
Yeah,
what you want to do for a living, take it seriously. Treat it like a
yeah,
business. Surround yourself with good people. Take as much advice as you can, and be prepared to work as hard as you've ever done in your life.
brilliant. What a great note to finish on. That was Simon Delaney. Thanks a million. Thank you so much for your patience. You were a star. It was
Bye,
such a
darling.
pleasure.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye, love.
Bye. Bye.
Today I am delighted and excited to be chatting with award-winning playwright Nancy Harris. In 2012 she received the Stuart Parker Award for her first original full-length play, No Romance, which premiered at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. Her play, Our New Girl, premiered at the Bush Theatre London and was longlisted for an Evening Standard Most Promising Playwright Award in 2013, and went on to have a very successful run here in Ireland before being prematurely shut down by the lockdown. She has written extensively for young people, including her reimagining of The Red Shoes at the Gate Theatre, an original musical called Baddies, and a few years ago, Journey to X for NT Connections. Welcome, Nancy.
Thanks so much for having me.
How are you today?
I'm good. It's really, really hot. It's really hot. I'm in London and it is about, I don't know, it was 30 degrees yesterday. So forgive me if I'm sweltering here.
So I'm particularly excited to chat to you today because I don't know if any of our team mentioned this to you before, but I was actually one of the original casts of Journey to X, which I mentioned there at the end of your
the connection
intro. In the Connections.
In the Connections program.
When I was 17 with my youth theatre, we were part of National Theatre Connections, and our first choice play was Journey to X, and we got our first choice. And I played Tara.
Wow. I probably saw it.
Yeah, maybe. And just before the interview, I actually remembered that I still had the poster. So I'm going to show you this here now.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. I love that poster. That's amazing.
So
now
funny little connection there.
That is. Wow. So that was what, 8 years ago? About 8 years ago? 7 or 8 years ago?
Yeah, about 8 years ago. 2012.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's great.
We'll go on to talk about Journey to X in a minute, but rewind. Before that, could we start off, could you tell us a little bit about your own experiences of theatre as a child or a teenager? Theatre yourself or any kind of drama club?
So I did, but it was funny. I was thinking about being a child, and I don't have very many memories of going to the theatre, like as a very young child. I think it would have been a real treat, but I'm not sure I would have seen it as a treat necessarily, in that I did, I think when you're young, well, I remember feeling, I think until I was a teenager, that going to the theatre was sort of something that I did dutifully. And I didn't necessarily connect to it as something that was for me. I did do drama classes and things in my school, and we did fetches where you recited poetry, and I loved all that. I loved being part of the performance, and I loved the drama. It was brilliant. I loved being in it, probably more than I enjoyed watching it. But I was definitely not, I wasn't in Dublin Youth Theatre. I wasn't the kind of person that got the lead in the school play, none of that. But I do know that when I was about 14, that was when I had my first kind of wow moment with the theatre. I went to see The Crucible with my dad. And it began as exactly what I thought it would be. It began as like people in costumes, and I was kind of going, oh God. And then I remember being slowly sucked into the amazing story, and because most of what I would have seen at that point would have been kind of Hollywood happy endings, I couldn't quite believe that this was going the door. I remember physically feeling completely terrified and completely gripped, and when it ended, I was just shattered. And I remember thinking, how do you do that? How do you get a whole room of people? How did it do it to me? Because I'd kind of come in like a sulky teenager, not really wanting to see this thing, and suddenly found myself pulled in
into a story.
It sucked me in completely, and I was devastated. And that's when I realized this is so powerful. It's more powerful than the cinema. It's more powerful than anything, because you couldn't hear a pin drop, and I knew that I wasn't the only person having that experience. And so that was my first experience with kind of something mind-blowing. I was about 14. So
when did you realize you wanted to be a playwright?
So they're kind of separate, because I think that time I didn't think about a writer, a director. The whole thing was just with the performances. I was swept up in something in a room with other people, and there was something going on the stage. There was something going on in my body, and like I remember feeling I nearly wanted to stand up and shout stop. Like I couldn't cope with the stress of it, and I've seen The Crucible since, and I love that play, but it's never had that same effect. And
now that you know the ending,
now that I know the ending, but it's still a brilliant play. But I think writing for me came much later. Actually, I think when I went to college, I went to Trinity and studied drama and theatre and classics, and I think when I was there, I probably would have been more interested in directing. And it was only at the very end that I took up playwriting, and it was much more of a fit. I had always been a writer. I was always somebody who wrote, but I hadn't kind of put it together that playwriting was actually the way to do it. It's funny. I don't know why that is. And then when it happened very quickly. It found me. And then when I realized, of course, I've been reading plays and I've been writing away secretly in my room, and I've been watching plays now for 4 years with a kind of a student eye, trying to learn everything I could. You absorb things. And so when it found me, then I knew exactly, I was like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
But it's quite intimidating, I think, writing a play and sending it out into the world. And you don't know if you have no idea what the response is going to be. Yeah.
Luckily, quite a lot of people care about the stories that you have written. So
Thank you. Well, that's good.
no, I mean, I remember bringing back to my personal connection with Journey to X, being a teenager and dealing with so for anyone that's watching that doesn't know, Journey to X is about a 14-year-old girl in Ireland pre-repeal who they form a band, and under the guise of auditioning for the X Factor, journey to England. And the way that you wrote for young people with such big issues like that, it was really captivating and digestible, and it really made the conversations that the play brought up with the young people involved in it and the director were just so valuable at that age. Well, at any age, really.
Yeah.
So would you tell me a bit more about writing for young people, and specifically about kind of Journey to X, which was commissioned by National Theatre Connections, and how you might find writing for young voices different, if you do, to writing for writing any other play?
So the interesting thing about that play was the year that I was asked to do it was the Olympics, and it was being held in London. Do you remember that? And so for the first time, the National Theatre asked people to pick a country and write about it. And because I was an Irish writer, they said, would you like to write about Ireland? And I felt initially like, oh God, that's like how, a young person's play about Ireland. And then I said, well, actually, I would really like to write about abortion, because it is illegal, but we know that people travel and it seems to be accepted. And this feels hypocritical to me and troubling. And I felt that there was a lot of pain attached to that journey and that silence.
Yeah.
And so I said, look, I'd like to write about it. And they said, well, actually, we've never had a play ever about abortion. So I went off and researched it and researched, this idea of the right to travel and the X case, and then building up the idea of the X Factor. And what I decided to try and do was to get into the minds of young people, which is that they, as I remember it, a journey to another country, to go and audition, there's an excitement. And then at the heart of it is this girl who's got a real thing that she's going over for, that no one is really paying any attention. And she herself isn't really valid in her country, or her story isn't really valid. She's sort of crossed out. And there's nowhere for her to take the situation that she's in a way. And so I wrote it to try and kind of convey the excitement and the headiness of going off, and have her sort of as the quiet sort of center of the play, really. But I was nervous because I hadn't ever written for teenagers before, and I didn't know if this subject matter would be, because it was such a specific thing to Ireland to go to England to get an abortion. I was like, is this going to have any relevance? Because Connections kind of goes to so many places. And as it turned out, a lot of places found it very relevant, because actually it turned out abortion was something nobody ever talked about anywhere, whether it was legal or not. And so, but I remember Anthony Banks, who ran the Connections program, he said to all the writers, don't see yourself as writing a play for young people. Don't try and write a play for young people. Just write your next play. Now, this was slightly different because it was about Ireland, but in a way, it was my next play, in that it was something I felt very strongly about. It was the way I would do it, which was hopefully playfully, but actually underneath something very serious. But he sort of said, don't try and be cool or be a teenager or
down with the kids.
There's nothing worse. Like I remember being a teenager, and and so I just tried to write it truthfully, and it seemed to be something that the schools did respond to. But it was as nerve-wracking for me because for all those reasons, and I just was like, is this a subject that is going to be relevant anywhere other than Ireland?
Well, it definitely was.
That's really, I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah.
No, it was a very formative experience. I really like that we're doing this episode on youth theatres, because I think a lot of people that are working professionally in the sector had hugely formative experiences working on plays like Journey to X with at that age.
Well, I was going to say it was a formative thing for me as a writer as well, because we got to work with youth theatres, and to have such intelligence coming back from young people was extraordinary. They were completely like mind-blowing, and also it was exciting to me as to what, because I think one of the things about Connections is they ask playwrights who don't necessarily write for youth theatres to write for youth theatre. And it's really interesting to see what do people, because basically you go back to yourself at that age, I think. And the wildest plays come from the most unexpected writers. And because they're accessing something that they normally in their adult playwriting, I don't really think there's a difference, frankly, between writing for young people and ordinarily, but there's something gets freed up, I think, in the writer, and they go in directions that you'd never expect. It's really exciting.
Young people don't want there to be a difference, I don't think. They don't want to feel patronised.
No,
and
it's just that we forget. I think we just forget what it was like to be young, and what exactly. And it's such a gift to be able to go back and go, okay, what would I like to do? What would I like to see? And also, of course, you're writing for your big cast, which you're never allowed to do, or it may seem to play so much less likely to be produced if you've got more than kind of 4 people. But in this instance, you have to write for a big cast. It was great.
I find it really interesting as well, actually, that when you talked about The Crucible and about how the ending took you by surprise, then looking at the way that you structured Journey to X and how the audience doesn't realise that it's a portion at all until kind of halfway through. You really think that it's just a play about a light-hearted comedy about some kids saving some money up to go and audition for X Factor, and then as you realise that, it draws you in a totally unexpected place. And was that conscious? The influence of predictable and unexpected stories taking you in unexpected places. Do you think that's something that you've?
Yes, I think that I do like to do that. But I also felt nervous with that, because I was like, I'm taking such a big subject, potentially controversial subject for young people. And I knew that in certain places they wouldn't touch the play because of what it was about. And so I was like, how do I write this play without being preachy or didactic, but that actually the play feels like it has some real stakes? And also, I think at that age, your friends are so important to you. And it was really kind of a play about friendship as well. But the word abortion is never used in the play. It never is, as you say, they never actually say. It's really only when you have that one scene between Penny and Dave, I think is the name of the guy who got her pregnant. And I didn't want to make him a villain either. They're just two young people.
You feel sorry for both of them. They're both in such a difficult position. And I think that's another great thing about a play like that for young people is, I think at that point in your life as a teenager, you can see things as good and bad and black and white, and presenting complex characters for young people to get their teeth into that have all these different angles and these different shades, I think is fantastic.
Yes, and teenagers are so good they're so able for that. They love the complexity. It's because it's that age where you're stuck between, you're not an adult, you're not a child, you don't have full agency, but you want agency. It's quite a dangerous time in a person's life. I mean, I think being a parent, I'm not a parent, but to be a parent of a teenager must be terrifying. And so much risk, but yet for the theatre, so much reward, because they are fearless and they go and they want to break rules and they want to take risks, and it's so exciting. And so I loved working with the youth group, and I really loved writing for that age. I found it really invigorating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So moving on from Journey to X and Connections, some of your plays, such as Our New Girl, for example, are quite dark and adult in theme, but they have children in the cast. So in Our New Girl, Daniel is only 8. Are there any particular considerations that you have to take into account when you're writing a play like that has a very young person in it?
So again, I just write, and I just write, and I go like, we'll deal with that. And so, I actually first put a child in a play in my first original play, No Romance. It's a triptych, and in the very last story, there's an old lady who's in a house in West Cork, and she's being put into a home by her son, who's driven all the way down there from Dublin with his son, and he's really stressed and angry. He's separated from the mother, and he's putting his mother into a home to kind of sort his life out and get her nearby, and not really thinking, what does she want or need? And so he's packing up her boxes, and she's there with her, I think, 10 or 11-year-old grandson, and she sort of tells the grandson her life story. And I'd never seen really a child, certainly in my own work on the stage, and I found it so, when we did the production of that the first time, I just found it so exciting what that dynamic was. This child who was hearing this entire hugely adult story, her life was massive, and kind of witnessing it. And because I think children are so often the witnesses to people's lives, to situations that whether they should be or not. Yeah. And so I found that really interesting. And then I went and did a completely other thing where he was sort of more of a listener in No Romance. And then in Our New Girl, that child is very much sort of central and has quite a big part, which was a risk. But every director that's directed it has taken it on and run with it. And again, children, what they're able to do, they're amazing.
I know there's that old expression that don't work with children or animals, but I find children are so much more able than people think they are, and they're so, some children can just be so watchable and so natural in a way that it takes an adult so long to train to the point of being as authentic as an uninhibited child can be on stage.
Well, yes, I think you're right. And I think actually you just said that the phrase never work with children and animals always interests me, because I think children and animals, they're in the present. And so they can have a situation where they make everything else look contrived suddenly, because you've got something on the stage that could walk off the stage, that could, most children are very reliable. They're really reliable actors. They kind of do exactly what is asked of them. But there is always that sense when you see a child, that child could do anything. And so suddenly you realize we're in a medium now that we all agree to play by rules. We agree to sit here and watch it. We agree we agree that's the fourth wall. And suddenly you've got a dog running around or a small child on the stage, and you go, will that person agree to the rules? And it sort of makes theatre feel dangerous again, because you realize we're in a live medium where anything could happen. I find that really exciting.
It's thrilling.
It's thrilling. But I think that's one of the things that a child can bring, is that sudden sense of, we're really in the present and there really is a risk. And but actually my experience of children is that they are amazingly able to, because theatre, it's a lot is being asked, of a child on a stage, and they're amazing when they can do it, and they will do it. Yeah.
Do you have any plans to write any more works for young people specifically? Or I know you said before that it was just your, like Journey to X, for example, was just your next play. Do you think you would ever consciously write for young people, or would you just find out if the next play that came to you happened to be for young people?
Oh, I'd do both. I would love to write for young people more. I'd love to work more with young people. I get more out of it probably than they do. And I I also, and I think there's a huge amount to learn from young performers. Actually, as you say, they're very in their body. They can bring things, a lack of self-consciousness that's really important. But at the same time, if it would be interesting if a play just came and if it was with young people in it, that would be brilliant. I think the only thing is children, because especially like with Our New Girl, generally you have to have 2 children in order to, even though it's a 4-character play, it's really a 5-character play because of that, so it makes it just a little bit more.
And you need all of that kind of licenses and time off school and
exactly. So that's where children get tricky in the theatre. But I absolutely think it would never stop me. I seem to put children into every play that I write. I don't know why. They come up and there they are, and I can't stop it.
But there's something very nice about that, about seeing, like you said, when you had the little boy there, suddenly the audience is receiving this information through the eyes of a child. And when you have different generations, like with Our New Girl, you have the parents and the nanny and the child, and they're all different generations, different perspectives. And I love the way that forces the audience to see a situation through different shoes. I mean, I know any good play should do that, really, but there's something about having the representation of ages which accentuates that in a way.
Yes, and having a child's perspective, because I think it gets so. I think that's what I find so beguiling about writing what's now called a family show, which is you're allowed to have the child's perspective, and I think it's the thing we forget all the time, that children have as much epic lives as the rest of us, and they're powerless. And they're very much at the mercy of the adults around them, and they've wild imaginations. They're natural role players and players, and so it always invites something. It actually, I think, working with children sometimes invites both the light and the dark, because that's what fairy tales do. They've got magic, but they're dark as well, and you can't brush one under the carpet. You have to have both. And so I think that's what I really really enjoy about writing for children, is actually the stakes are high.
So you've also written musicals. How does the experience of writing a musical compare to the experience of writing a play?
How does the experience of writing a musical? It's kind of a completely different. It's a very different thing, because you have to do a huge amount. Well, I've only worked with one composer called Mark Teitler on 3 things. So the musical for the RSC called The Magician's Elephant will be our 3rd collaboration. He did the music with me for The Red Shoes, but that wasn't quite a musical. That was much more of a play with a few kind of music hall songs. Yeah, but a music.
Sorry.
No,
when you write, do you write the playbook, the script and the lyrics as well, or do you write the dialogue and does the composer write the lyrics to the
I write the lyrics. I write them. We both write them. So I don't think there'd be any point. Wouldn't want to do just the book of a musical, because in a weird way that's the real journeyman work, is because the fun is the music and the songs. And so nobody really goes to a musical and goes, the book is great, pity about the songs. It's sort of, the music. So, but in terms of how to, we've developed a way of working together, which involves doing a huge amount of structural work together. So we literally map out the whole show before I write a word of dialogue. And we go, we think there should be a song here, or this, or this, or this. And then I'll write the book, and I'll write bits of the lyrics that I can write, and he'll write bits of the lyrics that he can write, and then we'll slot them back together. And then we'll go back again, and we'll end up swapping around songs. He'll fix things I've written, I'll fix things he's written. But you can't really start. And then we'll go, that song is stupid, that doesn't work there, but we really missed a trick over here. So it's very, very structural writing a musical. And it takes really collaborative. I don't know how, because I've heard that a lot of people just write the book and then they stick the songs in. And Baddies, the musical we wrote, the first musical I worked with Mark Titler on was a musical called Baddies for the Unicorn in London, which was about the villains of fairy tales being arrested for being villains. And it was all about bad, what the villain gives you. And we really went in blind. We didn't know how to write a musical. And I don't think they necessarily had wanted a musical. They just wanted to play with songs, but we delivered a musical. But we learned a lot. And what we learned was you kind of have to work out everything before you can do anything. So it's quite a lot of work. It takes years, I think.
Yeah.
And then you have to hear
very
it.
Different.
Very different. And it's not about me just going, that's my vision. You have to kind of, I don't really do that anyway, but you have to be able to listen. And a song, I think as well, songs have rhythm. So a play has a rhythm, a musical has a rhythm, a scene has a rhythm, and a song has a rhythm. And so you have to figure out, like, what do we need in this moment? Do we need a slow ballad that's going to really, or do we need something that's going to push the story along? So you're always working with those kind of rhythms as well together.
Yeah. Oh, how interesting. And
It's
have
really
so the way that you have collaborated on all of the musicals that you've written, you've never collaborated on a traditional play text, have you?
Not quite to that level of collaboration. Yeah, I've never co-written, because on a musical we're both co-writers, because a composer is a writer as well, and Mark writes the lyrics as well. So we're both writers. But I've never had a co-writing play in that way. But I have I suppose I've worked in devising situations with directors, but not to a full production. No, I tend to just go away and work on my own in a play, and it's just easier that way. For me.
When you're writing a play, the way you're talking about how you need to think about the whole thing with the musical before you start anything.
Yeah.
When you write a play, do you tend to just begin and see what comes out, or do you spend much time thinking about the overall structure of the thing before you start writing dialogue?
So I'm trying to, because what I've said before and what is true is I often don't structure things out, but it's not fully true that I don't understand. I understand structure very well because I studied it, and also I studied classics, and the Greek tragedies are total structure.
Yeah.
So I feel like what I did was I absorbed a lot about structure and then put that in a drawer, and I don't really think about it. I sort of allow the structure to reveal itself to me. I don't plot out plays.
It's not something you have to do consciously. It's something that happens as part of the process in the back of your mind, would you say? I
think that is right for me. But what I do think I do is I bookend. So I sort of have an image at the beginning, like a visual image, and then an image that I'm trying to get to. And then I don't know what's going on in between. And that's to be discovered. And sometimes it can come immediately, and sometimes it takes 3 years to come, and you're going, But I think I have an end point that I try and get to, because I think if I didn't, I might not get to the end. But I worry sometimes that that's a very slow process, because other writers I speak to, but everybody's a different animal. Some writers like to have everything plotted out before they write a word. That wouldn't work for me. I wouldn't want to write the play if I did that, because I think you want to discover, you discover a lot in writing.
What the characters want to say next, or...
what you don't know about them. You might
them.
Exactly. You might write 3 scenes and go, actually, I have no idea what that woman does for a living. So I need to go back and think, like in Our New Girl, she's a lawyer, which actually informs a huge amount about how she conducts herself, even with a nanny or with her husband. She kind of is making legal arguments all the time almost. And those kind of things inform. Sometimes you don't need to know what they do for a living. I mean, I don't think everybody needs to know what every character does. But you suddenly start to find a gap and go, I haven't worked out enough here, or there's something here that I haven't figured out yet. I need to go back. So there's lots. But I get that through writing, not through plotting it all out. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes total sense. I love hearing people's processes, especially.
But everybody's so different, aren't they?
Yeah,
Well,
so
I do too,
different.
because writers we have no idea how anyone else does it, because you're on your own all the time. And so I'm always asking other writers, like, do you plan out your plays? What do you do? But no
Yeah,
matter how many times they tell me, I'm not going to do it the way they do it, because you always have to do it the way you need to do it.
yeah. Kind of nice follow on from that. If there are any young people out there that are just realizing, God, I think I'd actually really love to be a playwright, would you have any advice for them?
I would say absolutely that they should follow that. And I think the big advice I would have is to trust your own imagination. No matter how crazy you think your idea might be, or you think nobody would want to hear this story, or this feels weird, what relevance does this have to what's going on in the world right now? You'd be amazed that our unconscious and our imaginations are so much more intelligent than we are in a way, and our consciousness is. And I think no one sees the world the way you see it. So I think I would tell any playwright to really trust their imagination, to write the play, even if they think no one might want to read it, because you'd be amazed. They'll probably write the best play that any of us have ever seen that none of us would have thought of, because following your own imagination and your own creative interests always end up resonating wider. That's what I think.
Hopefully there is a budding young playwright out there that is listening to
I hope so. We need loads of budding young playwrights. Yeah.
Thank you so much for
total
coming
pleasure
on Stage Door Live and having a chat with us. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Lovely to meet you too.
A huge thank you to both for taking the time to present for us this morning, and how lovely to have another look at Simon Delaney and Nancy Harris. At TheatreMaker, just to give you an idea of some of the work we've done, we have put in the hours. Here is TheatreMaker's impact in numbers. We've created 96 hours, 16 minutes and 10 seconds of content. In Irish theatre this week, we've made 14 episodes. Altogether, that's 5 hours, 38 minutes and 11 seconds. The average ITTW show clocks in at 26 minutes, and all of you have viewed ITTW 40,208 times. For Stage Door Live, we've made 31 episodes. That's 51 hours, 35 minutes and 9 seconds. The average SDL episode clocks in at 1 hour, 39 minutes and 51 seconds. And SDL has been viewed 64,799 times. Wow, it's my first time reading that figure. All our video content has 8,788 views on Facebook, 20,994 views on YouTube, and 9,878 views on Twitter. A lot of stats there. Big numbers. We've featured 157 artists, art workers, producers, directors, and other creatives. And we here at TheatreMaker have helped other organisations create just over 36 hours of content. This live stream is finishing. You know it's live because I was late getting here. Apologies. And I forgot to take off my mask. We're finishing now, but we'll be starting another live stream at 3 p.m. with Christina Florescu. Then I'll be joined here in studio with the brilliant Roxana Nicliam before we finish up the afternoon schedule with a super special behind-the-scenes look at the inner workings of TheatreMaker.ie. Trust me, you don't want to miss that. Of course, the Keep the Conversations Going festival is our chance to raise the funds we need to continue TheatreMaker.ie's support of the Irish theatre sector. please do consider making a donation on our website at TheatreMaker.ie. Thank you for joining us for this morning's session. We'll see you at 3 p.m.